Daniel handed his wife divorce papers in front of 300 guests, and he smiled while he did it. The ballroom went quiet. Glasses stopped clinking. Somewhere near the string quartet, a waiter froze mid-step with a tray of champagne balanced on his palm. Every eye in the room turned to the small stage where Daniel stood in his tailored black suit, holding a thin folder like it was a trophy he had been waiting years to lift. His wife, Grace, stood there in a soft blue gown, her hands folded in front of her, her face calm. Too calm, some would say later. But right then, nobody was thinking about her face. They were thinking about the folder in Daniel's hand, and the words stamped across the top page in bold red letters. Petition for divorce. I wanted you all to be here for this, Daniel said, raising his voice so it carried to every corner of the room. 15 years is a long time to pretend, somebody gasped. A woman near the bar covered her mouth. Grace did not move. I built one of the biggest companies in this city from nothing, Daniel continued, turning slightly so the crowd could see his profile, the one photographers loved. And for 15 years, my wife stayed home, went to brunch, posted pictures of flowers. That's fine. Somebody has to look pretty at the parties. A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the room. He fed off it. But a marriage needs two people pulling the same weight. I've been pulling alone. He stepped closer to Grace and held out the folder like a gift. So I'm setting you free, he said. And don't worry, I'm not a monster. I've already had my lawyers draw up a settlement. A generous one. Enough to keep you comfortable. Enough that you won't have to learn what a spreadsheet is. The room laughed again, louder this time. Somebody at a nearby table lifted a phone to record. Daniel loved that. He wanted this moment saved forever. Wanted it to travel through every group chat in the city by morning. Grace looked down at the folder in her hands. She did not cry. She did not shout. She opened it slowly, read the first line, and closed it again. Is that all? She asked quietly. Daniel blinked, thrown off for half a second. He recovered fast, flashing the smile the business magazines loved so much. That's all, he said. Sign it whenever you're ready. No rush. Take your time finding a lawyer who can explain the big words. He turned to the crowd, lifted a glass someone handed him, and said, "To new beginnings." Nobody quite knew whether to cheer. A few polite claps rippled out. Grace stood there a moment longer, the folder pressed against her chest, and then she walked out of the ballroom without a single word. Heads turned to watch her go. Whispers followed her like smoke. Daniel did not chase after her. He did not even watch her leave. He was too busy accepting handshakes, too busy soaking in the attention, too busy feeling like a man who had just set down a heavy bag he had been carrying for 15 years. He had no idea he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. 3 weeks later, Daniel stood inside a car dealership that smelled like leather and fresh paint, pointing at a silver sports car with a price tag that could buy a house in most parts of the country. "I'll take it," he said, sliding his black card across the counter like he had done 100 times before. The salesman smiled the practiced smile of someone used to rich men buying toys. He swiped the card, waited, swiped it again. His smile faded a fraction.
Sir, it's saying declined.
Sir, it's saying declined. Daniel laughed, the easy laugh of a man who has never once worried about money. Try it again. Sometimes the machine glitches. The salesman tried again. Declined. He tried a second card from Daniel's wallet. Declined. A third. Declined. Daniel's laugh died somewhere in his throat. "That's impossible," he muttered, snatching the cards back like they had personally betrayed him. "Do you know who I am?" "Of course, sir," the salesman said carefully, the way people speak to someone standing near the edge of a cliff. "Maybe try your bank directly?" Daniel stepped outside, phone pressed to his ear, dialing his personal banker with shaking fingers. Voicemail. He dialed his CFO instead, a man named Walter who had worked for him for 9 years. "Walter, my cards are getting declined. All of them. Fix this, now." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Too long. The kind of pause that makes your stomach drop before anyone even says a word. "Daniel," Walter said slowly, "I've been trying to reach you for 2 days. We need to talk. In person. Today." An hour later, Daniel sat across from Walter in the glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor of his own company. The city stretched out behind him like a painting he had stopped noticing years ago. Walter's hands trembled slightly as he slid a folder across the table. A different folder than the one Daniel had handed Grace at the gala. This one was thicker, heavier, full of numbers instead of legal words. "What am I looking at?" Daniel said, not really a question. "The family office accounts," Walter said. "The ones that held your liquid wealth, your personal savings, your investment funds, the reserve accounts we set up years ago. They're empty, Daniel." The room felt suddenly colder. "Empty," Daniel repeated, like the word didn't make sense in his mouth. "Empty how? Stolen? Hacked?" "Walter, talk to me." "Not stolen," Walter said. "Moved, slowly, over the last 3 years. Small transfers at first, then larger ones. All authorized, all signed." "Signed by who?" Daniel's voice cracked, just slightly, the first crack in 15 years of perfect composure. Walter turned the folder around and pointed to a signature line near the bottom of the oldest document in the stack. Daniel leaned forward, squinting, and felt the floor tilt beneath him. Grace's name, her signature, elegant, looping letters he recognized instantly because he had watched her sign birthday cards and school forms and grocery lists for 15 years. "That's impossible," Daniel whispered. "She doesn't have access to those accounts. She's never even asked about them. She's been the sole signatory on 4 offshore holding entities since the accounts were restructured," Walter said quietly. "You signed the paperwork yourself, Daniel, years ago, during the reorganization. You told me you didn't want to deal with the tedious back-office stuff, remember? You said, and I quote, 'Let Grace's name handle the boring paperwork. I don't have time for it.'" Daniel remembered, vaguely, a stack of documents shoved in front of him during a busy quarter. A signature here, a signature there, his mind already 3 meetings ahead. He had trusted the process. He had trusted his lawyers. He had never once imagined his wife, the woman he had mocked in front of 300 people for not understanding spreadsheets, was quietly becoming the most important name on every piece of paper that mattered. "Where did the money go?" he asked, his voice now barely above a whisper. Walter hesitated, then said the words that would haunt Daniel for the rest of his life. "Into her own fund. She's been running it privately for years. Green energy, artificial intelligence, some of the fastest growing sectors in the market. Daniel, the money didn't disappear. It grew. It grew a lot." Daniel sat back in his chair, staring at the folder like it might rearrange itself into a different, kinder story if he stared hard enough. It did not. The numbers stayed exactly where they were, cold, precise, undeniable. He had walked into that gala thinking he was the smartest man in the room, cutting loose the woman who understood nothing about business. He had smiled while handing her divorce papers, mocking her in front of everyone he knew. He had no idea that the woman he mocked had spent 3 years quietly building an empire with his own money, right under his nose, while he was too busy admiring his own reflection to notice. The preliminary court hearing took place on a gray Tuesday morning in a courthouse that smelled like old paper and stronger coffee than Daniel had the stomach for. He arrived in a suit that no longer fit quite as confidently as it used to, flanked by 2 lawyers who kept exchanging worried glances every time he opened his mouth. Grace arrived without a single lawyer walking beside her out of nervousness. She walked in like she owned the hallway, which, as it turned out, was closer to the truth than anyone in that room understood yet. Behind her came a small team of sharp-suited attorneys and a young woman carrying a tablet full of documents that would change everything. Daniel almost didn't recognize her at first, not because she looked different physically, but because the woman walking toward the front of the courtroom carried herself with a weight and certainty he had never once seen in 15 years of marriage. Where had that been hiding, he wondered. And then, slowly, painfully, he began to understand. It had never been hiding. He simply had never bothered to look. The judge called the room to order. Daniel's lawyer opened with the usual claims, painting Grace as a homemaker with no independent income, deserving of a modest settlement, nothing more. Standard language, practiced language, the kind of argument that had worked for wealthy men for generations. Then Grace's lead attorney stood up, and the entire tone of the room shifted. "Your Honor," the attorney said, My client is not a homemaker seeking spousal support. My client is the founder and chief executive of Ashford Capital Partners, a private equity firm managing assets in excess of $400 million. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Daniel's own lawyer turned to look at him, brows raised, silently asking if this was some kind of mistake. Daniel had no answer. He was staring at Grace, mouth slightly open, watching a total stranger wear his wife's face. The attorney continued, sliding a thick stack of documents across to the judge. We have submitted a full forensic audit covering the last 36 months of financial activity across the accounts formerly under Mr. Daniel Hargrove's name. During this period, my client redirected stagnant, underperforming capital into a diversified portfolio focused on green energy infrastructure and artificial intelligence technology. The returns speak for themselves, unquote. The judge flipped through the pages, silent, her expression unreadable. Furthermore, the attorney said, we have documentation showing that Mr. Hargrove voluntarily signed over management authority of these accounts to my client in the year 2022, citing in his own words, a desire to avoid, quote, tedious paperwork, end quote. This transfer of authority was fully legal, fully documented, and fully witnessed. Daniel felt his lawyer's hand grip his arm, a silent plea for him to stay calm, stay quiet, stay still. He barely felt it. His mind was somewhere back in that glass conference room 3 years ago, signing paper after paper without reading a single word, too busy, too important, too confident that nothing could ever touch him. The judge looked up from the documents and fixed her eyes on Daniel. Mr. Hargrove, she said, do you dispute the authenticity of your own signature on these transfer documents? Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No, Your Honor, he finally said, the words feeling like stones in his throat. Then, as it currently stands, the judge said, the majority of the marital estate, including all funds generated through Ashford Capital Partners, falls under assets legally controlled and generated by Mrs. Hargrove. This court will require additional hearings to determine final distribution. But I want to be clear to both parties. Based on what I am seeing today, Mr. Hargrove, you own considerably less of this marriage than you appear to believe. The gavel came down. Daniel sat frozen in his seat, while the room around him buzzed with whispered disbelief. He turned to look at Grace, hoping to catch some flicker of guilt, some hint of apology in her eyes. There was none, only calm, only the quiet, steady expression of a woman who had waited a very long time to be seen. Outside the courthouse, reporters had already gathered, drawn by rumors that traveled faster than facts ever could. Daniel pushed past them without a word, his jaw tight, his hands shaking with a mixture of rage and something he refused to name. Fear, maybe, or shame. He wasn't sure which one hurt more. 2 weeks after the hearing, Daniel packed the last of his personal belongings into a rented van outside the mansion he had once walked through like a king, surveying his kingdom. Court orders had frozen the disputed assets pending final settlement, and with the mansion legally tied to the accounts under investigation, Daniel had no choice but to leave. He moved into a budget motel on the edge of the city, the kind with flickering hallway lights and a vending machine that ate more coins than it gave snacks. The room smelled like old carpet and cheap soap. The bed creaked when he sat on it. He stared at the water stain on the ceiling and thought about the ballroom, the champagne, the folder he had handed Grace with such pride. He thought about the words he had said. Don't worry, I'm not a monster. He almost laughed, except nothing about this felt funny anymore. His phone rang. An unknown number. He answered out of habit, some old instinct that told him important people called from unknown numbers. It was Grace's assistant, a polite young woman with a calm, professional voice that somehow made everything worse. Mrs. Hargrove would like to schedule a meeting, the assistant said. She has a proposal regarding the settlement she believes you should hear before the next hearing. Daniel closed his eyes. 15 years of marriage, and now he had to make an appointment through an assistant just to speak to his own wife. Tell her I'll be there, he said quietly. The meeting took place in a sleek office on the top floor of a building Daniel didn't recognize, which stung more than he expected, considering how well he thought he knew this city. Grace's name was on the door now. Ashford Capital Partners, etched in clean silver letters. She sat behind a wide desk, the city skyline framed behind her, looking every bit the executive the courtroom had revealed her to be. Daniel sat across from her in a chair that felt smaller than it should have. "You wanted to see me," he said, trying to hold on to some scrap of the confidence that used to come so easily. "I have two options for you," Grace said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the desk. No dramatics, no raised voice. Just facts, delivered the way you might read a grocery list. Option 1. You sign a full non-disclosure agreement, waive any claim to the accounts under dispute, and accept a modest monthly stipend. Quiet, dignified, and you walk away with enough to live comfortably, though nowhere near the life you're used to. Daniel swallowed hard. And option 2? Option 2, Grace said, her voice steady. We proceed to a full public hearing. My legal team will present a complete history of certain business dealings from your company's earlier years. Dealings I've known about for a long time and chosen not to expose, because exposing them would have hurt people I still cared about back then. That courtesy expires the moment you choose to fight me in court. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. He knew exactly which dealings she meant. Old deals from years ago. Deals he had convinced himself were buried deep enough to never resurface. He had underestimated her in every possible way, and now the full weight of that mistake sat heavy across the desk between them. You've known this whole time, he said quietly, about everything. I've known for years, Grace said, and for the first time, something flickered behind her calm expression. Not anger, something closer to exhaustion. 15 years of exhaustion. I stayed quiet because I believed in the family we were building. I stayed quiet through every dinner where you talked over me, every meeting you scheduled during our anniversary, every joke you made at parties about how I wouldn't understand the numbers. She paused. I understood the numbers, Daniel. I understood them better than you did. I just chose for a long time to let you have the spotlight because I thought that's what love looked like. Making yourself smaller so someone else could shine. Daniel had nothing to say. The silence between them stretched long and heavy. I'm not doing this for revenge, Grace continued. I'm doing this because I finally understand that staying small never protected anyone. Sign the agreement, Daniel. It's the kindest option left on this table, and I don't offer it out of love anymore. I offer it because I still believe people deserve a way forward, even the ones who hurt them. Daniel looked down at the paper. His hand trembled as he picked up the pen. He thought about the ballroom one final time. The folder, the laughter, the words, "Don't worry, I'm not a monster." He signed. The final settlement was reached 3 months later, quietly, without cameras or crowded courtrooms. Grace retained 95% of the marital wealth, a figure the judge upheld without hesitation, given the documented, undeniable proof of who had actually built the fortune during the years it mattered most. Daniel received his modest stipend and disappeared from the social circles that once hung on his every word, his name fading from headlines the same way morning fog burns off under sunlight, slowly, and then all at once. Grace did not disappear. She stepped forward. 6 months after the settlement, she stood on a small stage, nothing like the grand ballroom where her old life had ended in front of 300 strangers. This stage was simpler, filled with folding chairs and quiet faces, women of every age, every background, all of them there for the same reason. She had launched a foundation, funded entirely from her own fortune, built to help women recognize their financial worth, understand their legal rights, and protect themselves long before a folder ever landed in their hands at a party. For a long time, Grace told the room, her voice steady and warm, I let someone else define what I was capable of. I want you to leave here today understanding something I wish I had learned sooner. Being underestimated is not a weakness. It's an opportunity nobody sees coming until it's too late for them to stop it. The room broke into applause, soft and genuine, the kind that comes from people who truly understand what the words mean. Across the city, in circles far removed from folding chairs and community centers, Daniel's name still surfaced sometimes, usually in hushed conversations among wealthy men trading cautionary tales over expensive dinners. The man who mocked his wife's intelligence in front of 300 guests, only to discover she had quietly built an empire from the very fortune he ignored. The man who signed away everything because he thought paperwork was beneath him. He became a lesson whispered at business dinners for years to come. Never underestimate the person standing quietly beside you. Sometimes they are not staying small because they lack power. Sometimes they are simply waiting for the exact right moment to stop being invisible. And somewhere in that glass office, with her name etched in silver on the door, Grace looked out over the city that once only knew her as somebody's wife. And for the first time in 15 years, she breathed like a woman standing entirely, completely, unshakably on her own 2 feet.
Welcome home to Norte.